Welcome to episode 18 in our series on Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto's The Way of God, and we are still in the third section, the section dealing with the soul and prophecy, and we're up to chapter 4, and this chapter is entitled The Prophetic Experience, and here the Ramchal is going to describe various recorded episodes of prophecy and the results of such information being passed over to the general public, and also the effect on the prophet, him or herself, regarding the delivery of this message, and how sometimes things don't go as one anticipates. The Ramchal is going to bring various stories about incidents in Jewish history that describe sometimes confusion that can arise from the prophetic experience. So the Ramchal begins. When a person attains prophecy at its highest level, everything reaching him during the prophetic experience is perceived undistorted and is fully understood. That is, even though at first he will have imaginings, as outlined in the previous chapter, he afterwards will have prophetic thoughts which are much more clear, which he understands completely, and these make it evident to him that he has attained the level of true prophecy. That is, being that his prophetic experience binds him to God, and it was God himself who was revealed to him and acted upon him, he realizes that the images that he perceived were visions of prophecy, resulting from divine influence. Knowledge on the subject matter contained in the revelation is permanently fixed in his mind through this influence, and it remains with him without any doubt. The prophet then feels no uncertainty about his being a prophet, about any aspect of his prophecy, or about its origin and results. So the Ramchal describing what a lot of commentators have described as the main essence of being a prophet. It's not so much the constant delivery of images of future events. It's more, the prophetic experience is more about this new physical attachment or metaphysical attachment to God. Now the prophet's life becomes almost like a direct line to God in a very profound way. So there was no room for doubt about his position or mission in life. The Rambam, Maimonides, describes the prophetic experience either as a gift to the individual for him or herself, or as part of a mission to perhaps reveal or coerce perhaps nations of the world or sects of people of the world with certain messages or warnings. And this is what the Ramchal is going to describe in this episode. So he continues, the Ramchal continues, one must also realize that a prophet does not attain this highest level all at once. He must elevate himself step by step until he actually attains full prophecy. Prophecy therefore requires a course of apprenticeship, just as in the case of other disciplines and crafts, where one must advance step by step until he masters them thoroughly. This explains what Scripture means when it speaks of the sons of prophets. Now, the sons of prophets, if we recall, is the kind of apprenticeship school that existed, the Bnei Nevi'im, in olden times. Where people would actually go to like prophet college, so to speak. And the Ramchal continues. These were the ones who apprenticed themselves to recognized prophets in order to learn the necessary ways of prophecy. It is also possible that a revelation from God begins in such a way that the recipient, not being an experienced prophet, is not even aware that prophecy is being given to him. Until the revelation intensifies, the individual thinks that he is simply experiencing something with his physical senses as usual. Only afterward, when the prophetic influx arrives in full, does he appreciate that what he experienced initially also was prophecy. This is what happened when God first called to the prophet Shmuel. What Shmuel initially was granted was not prophecy in its full influx. All that was granted him was the sound of a voice, as Shmuel regarded it as any other voice, and nothing more. Afterwards, however, when the prophetic influence was poured upon Shmuel in full, he realized that this voice was all in the manner of prophecy. The same was true when Moshe first saw the burning bush. At first, it was only revealed to him as if it was something that he was experiencing with his physical senses. He saw a burning bush, and God called to him using his father's voice. Only when prophetic influx flowed upon him did he recognize the true nature of this vision. Those who train themselves for prophecy must do so through a number of specific disciplines. The purpose of these is to bring the highest influence to bear on them and nullify the effects of their physical nature holding it back. In this manner, they attach themselves to God and bring upon themselves a revelation of His light. These disciplines can include various meditations, pronouncing certain holy names, and praising God with prayers intermingled with His names, combined in a specific manner as discussed earlier. The main initiation of prophecy, however, depends on these neophytes' devotion to God. To the degree that they make themselves worthy through their deeds and continually purify themselves through the previously mentioned disciplines, they can bring themselves closer and closer to God. The prophetic influence begins to come to them, and they undergo one experience after another until they finally attain true prophecy. All this, however, requires the guidance of an experienced prophet. He must have an adequate knowledge of the ways of prophecy, and therefore be able to teach each one what he must do to attain the desired result, depending on the individual's particular level of preparation. When these neophyte prophets begin to experience revelations, the master prophet continues to guide them. On the basis of what is revealed to them, he instructs them and informs them what is still lacking in their quest. Until they attain full prophecy, they require a master for all this. Even though some influence and revelation may have started to come to them, this in itself is not enough to immediately bring them to the ultimate goal. Before they can reach this, they need much guidance and training, each one according to his degree of preparation. Even after it is fully attained, prophecy still has different levels and degrees, both quantitatively and qualitatively. Quantitatively, some prophets may prophesy many times, while others may only do so once or twice in their entire career. Qualitatively, there are some who attain a very close attachment to God and thus receive a very great enlightenment, while the attachment of other prophets may not be as great, and their enlightenment is correspondingly inferior. In one respect, however, all prophets are the same. They all are completely aware of their attachment to God. The revelation that they experience is unambiguously recognized as coming from God, without any doubt at all. It is only in the degree of attachment, revelation, and enlightenment that differences exist. So the Ramchal again stressing the main aspect of prophecy is this new attachment or cleaving to God. Perhaps it's akin to something being physically attached to another being in some manner. And the prophet has no doubt that this is a direct connection to something holy and metaphysical, and some connection to God, some new divine connection. Now the Ramchal is going to describe how the prophet must take great care to accomplish God's mission in every detail. So the Ramchal continues. Part of a prophet's career may include being sent on a mission by God. This in itself, however, is not the essence of prophecy, since it is by no means necessary that a prophet be given a message for someone else. As we have already explained, the intrinsic nature of prophecy is to be attached to God and experience His revelation. This in turn may also be accompanied by information and enlightenment. It is sometimes possible, however, that a prophet should be sent with a message to others. He may be a recognized prophet who is well versed and totally knowledgeable in the ways of prophecy. Nevertheless, one who is not so well versed and knowledgeable may also be given such a task. Because of this, it is possible for a prophet to be in error when he delivers his message. This is not the result of his prophecy itself, but a consequence of the manner in which, on his own, he carries it out. When this happens and a prophet does not fulfill his mission properly, he might also be punished. This is what happened in the case of Yeravam's prophet. He was punished for not abiding by his own prophecy, as explained by our sages. The reason for this was that he was not sufficiently careful in the ways of prophecy. So what is this story of Yeravam's prophet? The story goes that in around 931 BC, the nation of Israel was split into two separate kingdoms. Rehoboam became the king of Judah in the southern kingdom, and Jerusalem and God's temple were located. Jerovam became the king of the northern kingdom that retained the name Israel. King Jeroboam, as it is pronounced in English, instituted his own system of worship by making two golden calves and setting them up in idolatrous shrines. One shrine was established at Dan in the far north of the kingdom. The other was strategically located in Bethel, on the border with the southern kingdom of Judah. People travelling south to worship at the true temple in Jerusalem would be tempted to stop off at Bethel and try out the new form of worship. God's true priests served at the temple in Jerusalem and lived in Judah. Meanwhile, Jeroboam created his own illegitimate priesthood from amongst his own people, and also declared his own religious feast days. Soon after King Jeroboam established his sinful religious system, God sent a young prophet from Judah to Bethel to pronounce judgment on the idolatrous form of worship. I think the name of this prophet was Iddo. So Iddo arrived at the precise moment that the king was offering incense on the false altar of the shrine. With amazing accuracy, Iddo predicted that a future king, Josiah, would burn the bones of Jeroboam's false priests upon this altar. Surely enough, around 300 years later, when the revival instituted by King Josiah of Judah swept north, the shrine at Bethel was torn down. To back up the words of Iddo, God gave an immediate sign to King Jeroboam. The altar split apart and its ashes and incense were strewn around. When Jeroboam tried to have the prophet arrested, his outstretched hand and arm were stiffened and paralyzed. God mercifully restored the king's hand, and Jeroboam offered Iddo some food and gifts before returning home to Judah. God had specifically directed the prophet Iddo not to delay, so he refused the offer. However, an older prophet who lived in the Bethel area chased after Iddo and invited him to come home with him for some food and fellowship. Initially, Iddo refused the invitation since he was following God's strict orders. However, Iddo lied and said that the Lord himself had directed him to bring the young prophet to his home. He was finally persuaded to turn back with him. During dinner, the words of God came upon Iddo, denouncing the disobedience of the young prophet. As a result of his disobedience, Iddo was killed by a lion on the road home to Judah. The lion didn't devour the man or kill his donkey, but rather stood guard over his body, which was a sign to everyone that this was not an accident. It certainly was not the normal activity of a hungry predator. When the prophet heard of the other prophet's young Iddo's fate, he retrieved the body, mourned, and gave him an honourable burial in his own grave. He also confirmed that the prediction would take place, and he asked for his sons to bury his own body next to Iddo upon his own death. So this was the young Iddo who didn't fulfill God's directions completely and was punished in the most severe manner. So this idea of prophecy and its consequences are very serious, and it's a life or death experience in many manners. And so the Ramchal continues from the text. It is also possible that a truth be revealed to a prophet and he not ascertain its full meaning. This, for example, is what happened in the case of Yonah. In his prophecy he was told, and it quotes from Yonah 3 verse 4, Nineveh will be overturned. This phrase, however, was subject to two possible interpretations. It could mean that the city would be overturned and destroyed because of its inhabitants' sins. On the other hand, it could also mean that they would be overturned from evil to good, as God indeed knew would be the case. If the phrase had only included the idea of punishment, then when God changed the decree and annulled the punishment, he would have revealed this fact to some prophet. The fact that a new decree had been issued would have been revealed to the prophets who were still alive at the time, and especially to Yonah himself. Since God had included both meanings in this phrase, however, it was not necessary to issue a new decree, but merely to fulfill the original decree according to its second meaning. Yonah, however, did not realize that this phrase had more than one interpretation, and thought of it only as a prediction of punishment. Our sages thus teach us that it was Yonah who did not comprehend. So this story teaches us that the prophet is not just the deliverer of messages. The prophet is chosen because of his or her intelligence and should interpret the message in perhaps the best possible way. But perhaps this was not done by this prophet. And now the Ramchal is going to describe how prophecy can be given with or without words, according to the individual trait of the prophet that it's being delivered to. So the Ramchal continues. It is also necessary to realize that there are two distinct aspects of prophecy, namely its content and its wording. A prophetic concept may not be circumscribed by words, and in such a case the prophet will express it in any way he wishes. Some prophets, however, perceive a concept that is also circumscribed by words. This is true of the prophecies of Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, and the other prophets who were given a message for future generations. In cases such as these, the prophecy was revealed with a precise wording, and these words simultaneously included a large number of concepts. Even in such cases, however, the phraseology depending on the particular prophet's own preparation and way of life. It can also vary according to the prophet's language style and manner of speech. In many cases, prophets are instructed to perform a certain act in conjunction with their prophecy. The prophet Yirmiyahu was thus instructed to wear a linen belt, and in another instance to place a yoke around his neck. The prophet Yecheskel was similarly told to trace a map of Jerusalem on a brick. In cases such as these, the act was used to stimulate the highest forces in a manner required by the nature of the particular prophetic concept. When this act was completed, The forces were readied and designated to translate this concept into action at the proper time. It is also necessary to realize that the only one who deserves the actual title of prophet is one who has attained full prophecy. This is an individual who is certain that his prophecy is from God, as discussed earlier. When he reaches this level, there is neither ambiguity nor error in his prophecy. In a more general sense, however, the title of prophet is also given to one who has the beginnings of a prophetic experience and has attained some degree of revelation in a manner beyond the realm of normal human experience. Such an individual, however, may not perceive the concepts unambiguously and may therefore be misled. This is what happened in the case of King Ahav's prophets, as we will be discussing presently. Those who know the ways of prophecy fully, however, are also completely aware of these stumbling blocks. They recognize their signs and know how one must protect himself from them until he attains true prophecy. These experienced prophets teach these things to their disciples, as discussed earlier. One of the important tasks of these master prophets is to bring their disciples to the truth and prevent them from being misled. Errors such as these stem from the corrupting forces discussed previously. These forces are allowed to exist and function according to their ordained nature and according to the power that they were given. One of these powers is the ability to deceive people and influence them in a manner resembling that of genuine prophecy. What they reveal, however, is not necessarily true. They can reveal false concepts and even bring about miracles to verify them. The Torah thus openly states with regard to a false prophet, and I quote from Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 2, "He will predict a sign or wonder, and that sign or wonder will come to pass." This can sometimes happen to a person against his will, and can also be brought around intentionally. A person, without having sought to do so, can experience a false vision, or even though he may have been seeking the precise opposite, namely true prophecy, he may be exposed to this evil as a result of his lack of perfection and proper efforts. In many cases, however, an evil person may actually desire to communicate with these evil forces and strive to attain such false prophecy. He pursues these forces and knowingly works to attach himself to them. In this manner, he hopes to gain a corrupt revelation, so that people should take him for a prophet. He would then have the power to willfully mislead them or gain status in their eyes. Included in the second category are the prophets of Baal and Asherah. They exerted themselves in this manner and attained some supernatural knowledge, through which they were able to mislead those who believed in them. They were also able to bring about miracles to verify their prophecy, as mentioned previously. The false prophets themselves, however, knew that all this came from the side of evil, which they themselves had chosen. They did not consider themselves true prophets, but engaged in this because of the evil in their hearts. This evil, however, can also come to one who is not seeking it. It is therefore very necessary for those who strive for true prophecy to do so under the guidance of an experienced teacher, as discussed earlier. Only such guidance can prevent such errors on their part. Errors are possible, however, only before one attains full prophecy. Once a person actually attains this level, he is able to clearly recognize true prophecy and distinguish between the genuine and the spurious. It is impossible for a true prophet to have any doubts whatsoever, as discussed earlier. This explains what happened in the case of King Ahav's prophets, as well as the concept of the spirit that misled them. As a result of his evil deeds, it was decreed that Ahav go to Ramoth Gilead and be killed there. It was also deemed appropriate that he be strongly enticed into battle, so that he should not retreat, even after suffering reverses. This is then what actually happened. First, Yehoshaphat told the king, and it is recorded in Melachim 22 verse 5, "Seek today the word of God." The king then inquired of his 400 prophets, who told him that he would be victorious in the battle. This, however, was not enough to entice him sufficiently. All this had been foreseen by God. When Achav's judgment came before the heavenly tribunal, there were some who accused him and others who spoke up for him. It was finally decided that something be sent to entice him, and the most appropriate lure was this particular spirit. All these false prophets were prophesying in Achav's presence. This meant that they were exerting themselves and doing things that normally would bring about a prophetic revelation. The vision that they were seeking, however, was nothing more than the evil revelation mentioned earlier. They were deceiving the king, however, and making him think that they were actually trying to attain a revelation from God. They did this in the king's presence in order to convince him all the more. The account thus says, I quote from Melachim 22 verse 10, "And all the prophets were prophesying before them." The false prophets continued in this manner until they experienced the revelation that they were seeking. The word that came to them through this corrupt prophecy was then, "Go to Ramoth Gilad and be successful, for God will deliver it into the king's hand." These were the words that the spirit, or evil spirit, or deceiving spirit had spoken through their lips. The false prophets themselves, however, were not misled, since they knew that they were not striving for the truth. It was only King Achav who was misled and convinced, for he had such great faith in these false prophets that he would not believe Michayu, who was actually a true prophet. Tzidkiah, the son of Kenana, however, went even further than these other false prophets. They had only repeated what had been transmitted to them by that spirit, knowing full well that it was false. Tzidkiah, on the other hand, had sought the ways of true prophecy, and when the vision arrived, he believed it and assumed that it was from God. He was therefore convinced that he was telling the truth when he said, "Thus says Hashem, with these horns you shall gore the Arameans until they are consumed." The reason Tzidkiah was misled was that he was not properly versed in the ways of true prophecy, and therefore could not distinguish between the genuine and the spurious. Our sages thus use him as an example of a prophet who declares what he had not heard. They likewise state that the spirit of Navos misled him. Our sages furthermore teach us that Tzidkiah should have been more careful. He should have known that these prophets were false, and Yehoshaphat had taught that, and I quote, "Two prophets do not prophesy using the same language." What had happened at the time was that the false prophets had attained a far greater revelation than usual, and had experienced it in a totally different manner. Even though their efforts were directed towards the side of corruption, as mentioned earlier, their revelation was so intense that Tzidkiah was misled into thinking that their prophecy was true this time. This was all ultimately the result of God's decree, as discussed earlier. Understand this well. That concludes the 4th chapter on the prophetic experience. And it seems that it's not all plain sailing for a prophet. And even the highly perfected state of this human being, the prophet, one can be misled by evil forces that are claiming to be sources from God, and it must be incredibly confusing to an individual who has reached that stage to perhaps be misled as the Ramchal says, one must, if you are willing to be a prophet, to go through the apprenticeship of being a prophet, you have to find the right guides, because the pitfalls are many, and you are dealing with supernatural forces that you have no experience with whatsoever, and you take them perhaps as the word of God, when perhaps they are exist in order to confuse you because you're not ready yet. So very interesting chapter about the ways of a prophet. And in the next episode we're going to describe the ultimate prophet, Moshe Rabbeinu. And that should be very interesting, as we know that he was the ultimate prophet and no other walked the world like Moses.